Hey, Redcasters, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos. Go Big Red. You know what? I'm just going to get the question for her because I think this leads right into it. How do you think the Huskers will do this year? But it's the thing I love about what Coach Rhule is bringing. It's this old school kind of vibe of we're going to get physical, we're going to hit, we're going to have fullbacks, we're going to do all those things, but we're also going to do it sensibly. We're going to do it in a 2023 kind of way, and we got to play with the with the transfer portal, NIL, all that. So it's a little bit of old school, a little bit of new school. But I want to get your thoughts. What are your thoughts here going into next season?
So this is where we have that conversation of Optimus versus Realist, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Optimist in me made a video 2 months ago where I said, here's my way too early schedule prediction. And I broke down every team that Nebraska plays against. And when you look back at what Nebraska was last year, Nebraska had what they were last year and what they're bringing in this year, including the coaching staff and all these transfer players who can play right away. Nebraska has the potential to beat 8 of these teams on their schedule. Will they is a tougher question because how much better will the line be? Both sides, the offense and the defensive line. How accurate will their quarterbacks be? Is this going to be a turnover-prone team? There are so many questions, and that's where the realist comes back. Nebraska can beat 8 of these teams because there aren't 8 really good teams on the schedule. There are 3 good teams on the schedule. The rest are decent, in my opinion. So because they're decent, it's hard for me to say Nebraska's only a 6-win team because I see so much potential. But the reality is, right now, Nebraska is going to win 6 of those games in my head. The realist in me is saying that. Mm-hmm. So as of today, I'm saying 6 with a ceiling of 8. And anything can happen because we don't know what the starting lineup's going to look like. We still don't know how the defense is going to project. There are so many question marks still. But ultimately, I hope that Nebraska can come away with just getting to a bowl game, because if you just get that spark and momentum back, I think the entire fan base is already bought in enough to this process. They're bought in enough to the idea that Matt Rhule isn't going to turn this around tomorrow. And it doesn't take him turning it around tomorrow to build the right class for the future, right? We've seen all these recruits who Nebraska is going to bring in on a Friday, Saturday. Well, if Nebraska can land, I don't want to say some ridiculous number like half, but if Nebraska can land a quarter of them, get 6 or 7 of these guys, sprinkle in a couple 4-stars, maybe bring in the big one, there's a lot of hope going forward. And fans would be very happy with 6 wins this year, just knowing that someone's got the program back on track, back into being, serviceable, not just being a train wreck that we all have to watch every single year.
Well, and that's certainly has been what it has been. Your dad, you said, was a USC fan. And I think of what the turnaround that Pete Carroll did there. And yet it wasn't instantaneous. They lost to K-State 2 years in a row in the early years. People forget that Nick Saban went 6-6 in his first season at Alabama, lost to Louisiana Monroe at the end of the year. Louisiana Monroe put it up on a billboard that Alabama had to drive by on the way back home. So, a 6-6 season by no means should be poo-pooed around here at all. What I would say is, and what I've been saying this offseason, to me, it's the race to 6. And that means I think it's important to get to that bowl game. I think that's an important minimum. Not that if we only win 5 that Rhule has failed, but I think it's important to show some early success. And right now, success is that getting to 6. Now, I'm not saying 6-6. I'm not going to put a ceiling on this program. I never will. Yeah. But if it takes us 6 weeks to win 6 games, awesome, right? Hey, we're 6-0, and we'll revamp our expectations then. Or if we're sitting at 5-6 and we're playing Iowa, then get the win, beat Iowa at home, and let's get to a bowl game. Getting to that bowl game for the first time in the history of the Redcast, I can tell you that would be a big deal. And certainly for this program, it's a big deal to that. There's some tangible evidence at that point that a change is happening. But, I don't think we're in the worst situation we've ever been in the history of Husker football to start with. We played a lot of competitive games over the last few years, but we found every conceivable way to lose them. And I think that's the task to Rhule there, is figure out ways not to lose those games by maddening 1-score losses time and time again.
Well, here's a question then. Mm-hmm. What's a failure of the season?
Well, right away, just using the metrics I just said, not making a bowl game, that was something that was a pretty big deal that we did here for a long time. From 1962 to 2003, making a bowl game was the expectation. In fact, really winning 9 games was an expectation.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not throwing that expectation out there, but getting to a bowl game, why we almost get to a point as a fan base, because we've been beaten down, right? why can't we make a bowl game? Why is that such a big deal anymore? I mean, in fact, everyone their dog makes one, and we haven't. And it's because, and if I said we're going to win 10 games next year, I don't necessarily look at 10 teams and say we can't beat these 10. Every year we do a thing before the season starts where we go game by game, and we have Twitter polls, and we get tens of thousands of Twitter votes on it. And it's game by game. What's Nebraska going to do? And almost every single year we go 10-2 or 11-1 in those votes, because you'd ask a fan, they would say, we're going to go 6-6. We're going 7-5. No way we're doing better than that. Then you ask them to break it down at a game by game level, and they can't do it. They just can't. It's not Colorado's not going to be the one that beats us.
Right.
It can't be Minnesota. It can't. Okay, fine. I'll give you Wisconsin. I'll give you Michigan. But the other 10, screw it. We're beating them all. And I get guilty of that all the time too.
I'm going to be honest with you. If Nebraska doesn't win 6 games, I'm going to be feeling some type of way this year. I don't think it's going to be the ultimate momentum killer, but I do think it's going to hurt a little bit in recruiting, which means it might take a little bit longer to get back built to be in that perennial 9-win team. I think if Nebraska hits 4 or 3, it's going to be really brutal for the fans. And you think back to 2020 or 2000, what was it? 21, when there was a lot of hype because you had the defense coming back. You had JoJo Doman hyping everybody up, and we believed that they were going to be a force. The defense was a force, but the other half didn't come together. And because of that, Nebraska didn't live up to any expectation, because every expectation we set along the way never came true. It was like we thought we could get to 6 wins that year to start. And then after every single week losing by 1 point, we thought, okay, well, it can't be this bad the entire way. And then we lose by 1 score all the way out. And then you had last year, and there was so much hype with this new staff, all of the transfers. And the point is, how much more can the fan base take? 3 or 4 wins, I think that would be bone crunching for the fans, knowing how much potential this team has. And take away the team's potential. Look at the schedule. This is, again, a very weak schedule, and they've got to beat some of these shitty teams.
Well, and I think that's part of it, is that when we've lost, I hear people say, well, you're in the Big Ten, and the Big Ten is that's why we've lost games. Well, bullshit. We've lost to Troy, and we've lost to Northern Illinois.
Right.
We got swept by a Colorado team that I was out there at the Colorado game where 35,000 of us in red or in Boulder, and we're up 17-0 in half. Right. I mean, we found every conceivable way to lose games that you shouldn't lose. One of the things it's in addition to defense, defense did great a couple of years ago. Offense struggled, but how about special teams being so poor, losing so many games? You can't count on. I was at the Oklahoma game in 2001, where we miss a 30-yard field goal from the middle of the field. We get an extra point blocked and returned for 2 points. That's a 6-point swing in a 7-point game. Before the first play of the game, we have 2 pre-snap penalties, and Adrian Martinez isn't touching the ball until it's 1st and 20. And you just sit there and you pull your hair out. And in the COVID year of 2020 against Northwestern, we have 5 offensive linemen have 5 penalties in the first half. You can't win football game. That's just bad football. And you're going to lose in the Big Ten. You're going to lose in the MAC. You're going to lose playing in Colorado. You're going to just lose games. It's losing football. And that's almost the thing that I would be disappointed. To go back to your question about what would I be disappointed in if the culture of just losing and that mentality can't get flipped by Rhule, which, by the way, I would be shocked at this point if it's not. I
agree.
If there's one strength that guy has immediately, it is getting you to want to run through a wall for the dude. And he has the son of a preacher kind of prophecy that he brings with him. I mean, he knows how to get people connected. And I'll make one other statement that I want to hear from you here. This reminds me, well, it doesn't remind me personally, I wasn't alive then, but everything I've read about when Devaney got here after 20 years of losing, bad football for 20 years, lots of coaches they went through. When Devaney got here, before he even coached a game, he spent the entire first offseason going across the state, getting people to support him, going up to Shatter and going to Valentine, going all over the place and just saying it's important that we get Nebraskans to follow us. But he also kind of highlighted a game on that schedule early. It was at Michigan. It wasn't a very good Michigan team. That's the state that Devaney was from, was Michigan. And they went down to the Big House and they beat Michigan in week 2. And it was this game that kind of gave the team confidence. It was the game that gave the fans confidence. Oh my gosh, we may actually get something turned around.
Right.
When I think this season, Minnesota in week 1 it actually kind of is that game a little bit to me. It's a road game. It's a Thursday night game. It's in August. I mean, the last 2 August, we haven't got out of the month without the season ruined already. And the idea that we could go down there, beat Fleck, which would be just wonderful for Husker fans. But I don't think it's an unbeatable Minnesota team, and they've had their own offseason of hell right now, losing coaches and losing players. I look at that game as it's a big moment if we can go in there and come out with a W.
I would say that's a game Nebraska should win. So when I watch that, I'm going to be watching for, is this a game where Nebraska competes the way they did last year in the first half, or is it a second half performance? Because last year's first half against Minnesota was exactly what I would have expected against Minnesota the last 2 years. But I think most of us would have. The first half was fantastic. They ran the ball well. The game management was good. The defense played solid. The second half was such an embarrassing, just the whole thing was just embarrassing, the performance. If Nebraska has that second half kind of vibe against Minnesota this second time, it's going to be hard for me to have a lot of faith that this team can win more than 6 this year. But if Nebraska comes out, keeps it within, I don't want to say 3, let's say 7. If Nebraska keeps it within 1 score at all, I'm going to feel good that even though Rhule couldn't win the first one, let's say, I'm going to feel good that he's got this team back on the right track. And I'm not going to say that he needs to win his first game against a coach who's been at Minnesota for 7 years, returns his quarterback, brings in a really solid running back, obviously has a bunch of guys on defense returning. There's a lot working against Matt Rhule in this situation because it's a road game against a solid team with a lot of experience. But I do have a lot of hope that if Nebraska was to win that game, it could set Nebraska up for the more exciting season that we're hoping for. 8 wins.
Let's bring
like
that
predicted.
Let's bring the optimistic side of this. Let's put our happy hats on for a second. We beat Minnesota, and we beat them by 1. We beat them by 10. I don't really care the difference, but we beat them. Now, how does that change? Whether it's expectations or your perspective, how does that start to change it going into week 2?
Instant. So if Nebraska beats Minnesota, that's an 8-win football team. And there's no question I will be riding high on them because they're going to win their next 3. Colorado's going to be okay this year. I think Colorado has a chance to win 6. I don't think they're going to, but I think they have a chance to. They have a lot of talent and they have good coaches, right? And they play in the Pac-12. There are some weak teams on their schedule. Anyway, Nebraska's going to beat Colorado. They're going to win those next 2 games. And then you have Michigan, who will call it a loss. But after that, their most challenging games are Iowa, Wisconsin, and I think Illinois. Every other game on there is winnable. And by the way, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois are all beatable teams. Nebraska has a real shot to make a serious bowl game, not a guaranteed rate bowl, to make, Holiday Bowl level. I don't know what the Holiday Bowl equivalent is now. Is it one of the Florida Bowls? But anyway, I would say if Nebraska can beat Minnesota, 8 wins is my new expectation.
Yeah, well, and just getting off to that good start. It's the thing that Frost talked about forever. We just need momentum. We need momentum. And whether it was lightning strikes against that, Akron, or just baffling play calls against Illinois 2 years ago, we were
there
at
was
the
always
Illinois
something to make the team believe. Or I don't know if it was the fan base, the team, something always held them back from crossing the next step.
Yes. And when you start off 0-6 in year 1, I don't want to turn this into a bash Frost thing. Yeah. I had all the expectations and there'd be nothing I'd be happier than right now to be talking with you about Frost going into year 6 and having won countless titles already, right? I mean, that's who didn't want the golden child coming home to have all the success, but it just didn't happen. And for him, it didn't happen quickly to go 0-6. Now we were more competitive, but you're still 0-6. And it's one of the reasons why I think it's so important for Coach Rhule to be able to demonstrate some of that success early on, that the changes he's making, we're starting to see on the field in smarter play, not giving up 10-0 leads against Minnesota at half, not giving up a double-digit lead against Wisconsin in the fourth quarter, making the 30-yard field goal, kicking the 10-yard field goal against Michigan when we drive down. And that Michigan game 2 years ago, people still talk about Martinez fumbling at the end, but what about us not kicking a field goal when we drive down the field and have a chance to be the first team to take a lead on Michigan that whole season? There's just situational football times where getting ahead of a team that hasn't been down, that it puts stress under them. And we've seen what Nebraska looks like under stress. Let's put other teams under stress.
Yeah, I'm hoping that Matt Rhule has a little bit more of that game management, I guess we'll say, than Scott Frost did, because Scott Frost's game management was awkward at times.
You talked about like the Xbox game. If you had the coaches, and it said, coaching ability, game
Yeah.
management, this and this. What would Frost be for game management?
I mean, he was the worst in the Big Ten because there were always so many questionable moments, right? The
Mhm.
the field goal with Michigan was a great example. The onside kick was a great example against Northwestern. And I'm sure there were a bunch of times when he was. I know there were a bunch of times when he wasn't running the ball as much as he should have been, right? It was less game management and overall offensive scheme, I guess we can say.
Mhm.
Uh, there was a lot of issues with Scott Frost, unfortunately. What's sad about the Scott Frost situation is we all had so much hope. We were all
Mhm.
so excited. And so it hurt even more because we were so amped up for it. I think if Matt Rhule failed, we'd be frustrated, but it wouldn't be the same pain that we felt with Scott Frost. I guess that's the good thing for Matt Rhule. He doesn't have as
Mhm.
much pressure as Frost did.
You had a great show on Monday night, and Redcasters, if you haven't watched it yet, I don't know how. There were 17 or so thousand people. I think they already have, and it was just talking about the first day of spring practice, but also you brought up the roundtable discussion that Coach Rhule, Coach Frost, and Trev had, and I asked you this not only as a fan, you're a Husker fan, but you're also a producer, a video guy. You have history in media. How good is Trev in that role? ESPN background and everything. When he's sitting at a round table, I'm like, he needs to do this 50 times a year. He needs to do this with basketball coaches, with bring the soccer coach on, bring fans on, bring players on. I mean, he is so good in that role. And then Coach Rhule is so good in the role that he was right there sitting next to him.
Mhm.
We had Coach Osborne on this show a year ago. And Coach, you could just see him when he was talking with Rule. I mean, he's bought in even. I mean, he's like, I wouldn't change a thing. So
Yeah.
I guess as you saw that, what were your thoughts watching that for the first time?
Well, it all ties into the professionalism and
Mhm.
how this program feels like a more legitimate program. It doesn't feel like it was ran the way it's been run the last few years. There were
Yeah.
a lot of question marks around the program. I think one thing that people love to say is, well, how did you not know Scott Frost was a mess? Why were you vouching for Scott Frost to stay the head coach? Well, in all honesty, we didn't see anything coming out of the program. We didn't get anywhere near as much access. We didn't hear anywhere near as much bad or good about the coaches as we do now. It felt like a lot of the issues with Scott Frost got swept under the rug and the media didn't report on them or the media didn't know about them. You had
Mhm.
the one leader, Trev Alberts, who a lot of us trusted. I know there are some people who have their comments and nonsense about Trev Alberts, but he has been solid since the day he got hired. Trev Alberts vouched for Scott Frost, obviously, by keeping him for another year. Anyway, after all that was said and done, we looked at the last 5 years of the Scott Frost era and said, there was so much dysfunction and so much we didn't know about. It wasn't transparent. It was just a clusterfuck over at Nebraska. And now, when we get all of this content and we see all the positivity, we hear all of these things from leadership, from Matt Rhule, from Trev Alberts, Tom Osborne, and there are other media members and people who've come in now and given their takes. There's obviously a bunch of guys and talking heads on the radio who are close to the program who said what they feel. It's a real program. It feels like a professional place. It doesn't feel like a high school program anymore. And so because
Mhm.
it's more professional, it gives all of us more confidence, especially myself, and it makes me more excited to create content for the future because I know that I'm not doing as much guessing. I feel like there's actual truth to what these coaches are saying. It's not just hope. They're not
Mhm.
speculating. They know what their program's going to produce. They know what these players can do because they've seen it before. They have a process that works. The last administration, the last staff didn't have a proven process, I think is the best way to break it down. And because they didn't
Mhm.
have that proven process, now when you look at it next to a process that's, what it is, it's night and day different. So that roundtable was just another example of professionalism inside the Nebraska program.
Absolutely. Well, we had a comment from Jamie earlier, and he talked about, as we were saying, what would we expect with Rule in year one? And he mentioned the 1 or 2 wins that he had again, with Temple in year one. And I think to your last point there about this is a coaching staff that's been through this before. It's apples and oranges when we're comparing year one in Nebraska versus what he went into at Baylor versus what he
Yeah.
went into at Temple. We're not even in the same realm, but it is that he's been through this before. And when you've done something before and you've learned from it, and people can sit there and question, why do you hire Bob Wager? Why do you hire a Texas high school coach? And that would mean a lot. That maybe be a scarier thing for me if you haven't also hired Joey McGuire to be out of Texas high school, and now he's the head
Yeah.
coach at Texas Tech. You've done this before. You've demonstrated the success. And what I like about when Trev, you go back 18 months ago when Trev kept Frost around for another year. I mean, he was doing a lot of things. He's observing. He's a grinder. He's going to be there at 5 o'clock in the morning. He's going to leave at 8 o'clock at night. And if he's not seeing coaches around there at that time, that's a problem. He's going to walk the hallways. And if he is trying to raise $160 million for a new cafeteria, and he's seeing the current cafeteria not being full with players, that's a problem. And those are things that you know, he could have let go of Frost earlier. He absolutely could have, but he learned a lot, I think, in that offseason. And it didn't take him long to pull the trigger last year, 3 games in the season. And then when he did, that press conference, he wasn't trying to bury Frost. He was just simply, these are the things I want to see moving forward. And I want to see a grinder. And I want to see us be physical on the lines of scrimmage and win that part of the game. And all these little things. Then Rhule gets hired, and he is literally saying the same things. Then they introduce Satterfield, and Satterfield is everything just feels like it's an extension. So you kind of talked about the dysfunction of the last few years. This is the first time in a long time where I don't see that dysfunction from, you know, all the way up and down the line.
Well, these pieces fit together. I think that's the best way to say it, right? You had the last staff, and Scott Frost picked some guys at random when he had to fill jobs. Like the Matt Lubick felt, you know, kind of out of nowhere. It wasn't like he was tied to anybody else on the staff.
He was tied to a credit union.
He was tied to Scott Frost, but he wasn't tied to the other staff.
You're right.
Whereas this staff has all worked together in some capacity. Most of them have worked together in some capacity. They've all worked with Rhule before. So he understands their temperaments, their personalities, their strengths, their weaknesses, and how he can develop them into being a better coach. More importantly, how he can develop them into being a fit for his staff. Because you look at a guy like Donovan Raiola, there were a lot of questions. Why is he being retained? Well, I'll tell you the number one reason why. Because he fit with the staff. It wasn't just about him being a good offensive line coach or having the right offensive line philosophy. He was a fit with the culture that they wanted to build, because as we've seen, one of the most important things in college football is building the right culture. I guarantee Kirby Smart has a staff that he's built up that's similar to this Matt Rhule staff. Because when you want to build the right culture, you've got to have the coaches buy in before you have all of your players buy in.
Yeah, I think that the Raiola one was awesome. How when Rhule was asked about it, you know, why did you retain Raiola? And he's like, well, for one of the reasons, he wouldn't leave. We'd show up those first couple of weeks. He just kept working. And I don't know, we kind of like that, right? I mean, and Satterfield said, you know, he was already going into it thinking I'm going to get somebody else, but you start to talk to Raiola and, oh my gosh, you know, you have these connections. And you said something too about Coach Rhule, that he's going to develop coaches just like he develops players. And he really seems like a manager of coaches. Like that's a passion of his, not a passing, like, oh, it's part of the job I have to do, but I really want to be the offensive coordinator, or I really want to do this fun part of it. No, I'm going to hand those jobs off to somebody else, but I'm going to develop these coaches. And I think the tree that he's already started to create demonstrates, again, another example of this is something he's done before, you know.
Elite coaches have elite coaching trees.
Yes.
So you see Nick Saban and the coaches that he's putting out, Bill Belichick, you look at all the coaches tied to him. Now, what's going to happen with Matt Rhule? He's investing the same way that these other big-time coaches are investing into their staff. And I would assume that the trajectory is going to continue to stay on trend. He's got Joey McGuire now at Texas Tech. Who's his next coach? Is it Tony White? Because I've heard that Tony White's a hot name to be a head coach at some point. So is that the guy that he went and picked out because he knows Tony White's coachable, just like he talks about all of his players being coachable? I think these are all really important things to pay attention to. And I think they're all kind of the makeup of what makes Matt Rhule, I don't want to call him elite, but a really good head coach right now.